Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Perfect.
Good evening.
So you are all very welcome to this week's 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum. What we've just seen there over the last couple of minutes is just a little bit of a taster of what some of the Santa Rita estate over in Chile looks like. So I think it's definitely put the longing on me to be somewhere warm and sunny, because I don't think today has been our finest yet. But we're going to jump into this evening. So thank you to everyone who's already joined us so far. So tonight I'm delighted to be joined by a long-term friend and our former curator in the Little Museum, Simon O'Connor, who's now the inaugural director of the Museum of Literature across the green from us.
How's it going?
Very well, thank you. And then we're also joined this evening by Oscar Salas, who is one of the winemakers working in Santa Rita over in Chile. And I know many of us who are on this call this evening will have had a chance to taste some of the wines that Oscar has made over the course of the last couple of years at the lectures and concerts here in the museum. So Oscar, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I hope we have a nice chat today.
I'm looking forward to it. I think we'll jump into some stories pretty quickly, but I guess, Oscar, I might ask you just to start us off and let us know what wine are we going to be tasting this evening?
Okay, today we're gonna taste the State Reserve Chardonnay. I know we were talking. You told me that probably on the market you're having the 2015 harvest.
That's right.
So I'm having here the 2017 and the 18. I don't have now the 15,
Okay.
but we're gonna go along, the 15 and all the different vintages of the wine. Huh?
Perfect. Well, I look forward to it. Well, I've got my glass of wine here in front of me. So
Good.
Sarah, I accidentally started on the red. Should I go
Oh,
right straight? Just give me one.
you're off to a great start. Well, while Simon grabs himself a glass of wine, Oscar, I might ask you just to tell me a little bit about this Chardonnay. So when I'm tasting, whether it's 17, 18, and I think we've been quite fluid about some of the vintages in the last couple of weeks, what flavors, what profiles, what might I be able to taste when sampling a Chardonnay like this?
so in general terms, Chardonnay is about 8% of what we do in Chile. It's We find two kinds of Chardonnays. You can find floral and lighter Chardonnays, a little bit more metallic. And then you have this a little bit richer and with lots of fruit Chardonnays. This is one of the last. This is Chardonnay comes from the Limeri Valley, which is about 350 kilometers north of Santiago, the capital. That would be like 3 or 4 hours driving. And this is not a big valley, but it's but the best varietals that we get there from is the Chardonnay. The quality there is amazing, and the profile is basically it's a lot of palate, in the wine, and it's a mixture of palate, very exuberant fruit, you know, and concentration. The wine is where we have the property Limari is very close to the coast, and you have to remember Chile is a Pacific country, so everything about the Pacific influences, the winemaking here. And in this case, there is a couple of platforms with sandy and ocean soils with a lot of calcium, and that blends with the cool climate near the ocean because of the Humboldt current that comes from the Antarctica. So it's a mixture of freshness and calcium in the soil, which gives more minerality and more heavy weight in the palate, and also a lot of fruit. So
it is a I can definitely taste the fruits. I think it's one I've been a fan of for a number of years, so it's lovely that we're tasting it now this evening. So now that we have a glass of wine in front of us, Simon, I'm going to come to you for a moment. So I would say a good number of people who are with us on the call this evening have hopefully been into the Museum of Literature since you opened there last year. But I think I'd love you to kind of take us back to the start and kind of start off by telling us a little bit about Molly and I guess what's going on across the other side of the green.
Yeah, it's well, first of all, it's really nice to have that smell again of the Santa Rita white wine, the Chardonnay. It's gorgeous because this was a really familiar smell when I was working in the little museum. So it's great.
Cool.
So the I mean the Museum of Literature Ireland is it's a creative collaboration between UCD, which is the biggest university in the country here, and the National Library of Ireland. So they got together to effectively create a museum of literature in the original home of the university, which is on the opposite side of St. Stephen's Green. We can see Sarah's office from our roof, and these were beautiful, very beautiful old buildings, really kind of high Georgian houses that had become quite quiet as the university developed and expanded out to the suburbs. So there was always a desire, I think, to create something very public on that site. It was a real trophy site, and the two partners came together with a vision that was supported then by the Naughton Foundation. Martin and Carmel Naughton came on board, Fulcha Ireland came on board, and we opened up in September of last year. And we're reopening to the public on July the 20th. So it looks like opening this museum is becoming an annual event now.
Yeah, so it obviously, I think with COVID, it didn't exactly go to plan, but I guess how was the opening period initially? How did the first couple of months go for you guys?
It really just went better than we could have expected. You know, it was, I mean, it was like so much of it was very similar to the little museum in a way that that upon opening we realized that there was a public need for this thing. So we were really embraced by the public. You know, in museums we do a lot of visitor analysis and things like that, and there were so many repeat visits again and again. The site itself is very special, so as well as the exhibitions, there were beautiful gardens, and we put an awful lot of effort and thought into how they were developed. A wonderful cafe as well, and so it was becoming a real home, not just for fans of literature, but actually for writers as well. So so we had a fantastic opening period. A lot of events as well, so it's you know, an awful lot of lectures and seminars and symposia, and we even had a royal visit. You know, about 3 weeks before we closed, the Duke and Duchess were among the last people whose hands I ever shook, and then we had to close like everybody else on March the 12th.
And we're kind of all in the response stage.
Yeah.
The time since, I guess I was on St. Stephen's Green this afternoon to go into the museum in our kind of reopening plans, and this was my first time in the building in nearly 2 months. So it was it was a lovely experience, but a strange one in its own way.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the world that we're in today. And I guess, Oscar, talking about this idea of the world that we're in today, you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier when we were talking, when you were introducing us to the Chardonnay that we're tasting this evening. But I'm kind of curious, for you as a winemaker, how does the external environment around you actually affect winemaking? Like, I know Terry, your colleague in the last couple of weeks, has told us about the volcanoes, has told us about forest fires, has told us about what life is like and what the environment is like in Chile. And how does that impact your work making wine?
Well, you know, we're really used to that. So besides the drought, you know, the water that the vines need, and the process itself, we, you know, usually when we get earthquakes, or we talk about an earthquake when it becomes above like 6.8, because, you know, below that we feel them all the time. So it's like people, you know, they just say, oh, okay, an earthquake, cheers. They come, you know, and have a drink, and that's it. So remember, we've had 9.2, 9.6
Mm.
So the 5 top earthquakes in history have been from Chile. So we're really used to that. And
Mm.
volcanoes, they hopefully they're far from the vineyards, so we're
Yeah.
still making wines. um, but yeah, I would say the coronavirus has shocked us much more than the rest external environmental problems that we have. Because it was a tough period because we remember the coronavirus. It started a little bit later than in Europe, so I would say at the end of March it became tough, a tough issue here, and so everybody went, in panic, and they went home and quarantine and all that. And we are so productive, we were one of the key industries,
Mm.
not because of the wine, but because we supply grape. We harvest.
Mm.
So it was basically because of the harvest we needed to. So we didn't do any quarantine. It's like 300 people working without quarantine and anything of that. And we'll go every single day to work, having the cares, that we should. But it was a tough time, a very tough time. Hopefully we could, put all the grape in the winery. That was the first goal. And then winemaking, we lost a lot of old people first, because the first thing we did, is okay, 60 and above, just go home. And we have a very low rotation because of the history of Santa Rita. We have 400 years of history, even though this is like a new country.
Mm.
Santa Rita is the oldest in Chile. And we have registered, making wines in 1640, which is a long time for us in Chile. And so we have a very low rotation, a lot of people, that have been working with us 30, 40 years. And so it was tough because we lost a lot of key workers. But hopefully we did it.
Okay, and yeah, because your harvest this year was much earlier than it normally is. Like, does it look like it'll be a good year for wine production, or is it too early to tell about that?
Yeah, I would say it's going to be a very good year. It was a combination of factors and luck, because we had a really early, as you said, harvest, because we've had a drought for the last 10 years. We're scarce of water supply, and so the vines started to ripe earlier. Also, the climate changed. The temperature of the valleys, was up about 1 or 2 degrees, which for the vines is a lot. So we ended up collecting the grapes like a month ahead of historical periods.
Mm.
So, but then on the other hand, hopefully it helped, because we had high acidity, so very fresh wines basically.
Mm.
And the vines are very intelligent. They can see what is coming, and so they adapt to conditions. So they saw the heat, the lack of water, and they said, okay, we have to ripe earlier to be collected. And so they did, and they brought nice acidities, nice palate. So I would say it's a really good harvest, and hopefully by the time that the COVID started here, we had already in like 60% of the harvest, which on a normal year we wouldn't have had, 20%.
Mm. Okay, well,
Uh,
we'll
so
we'll look forward to
we're
tasting
lucky.
the fruits of that result in due
Yeah.
course when they reach Ireland in bottles. To those of you who are with us this evening, if anyone has a question for Oscar or for Simon, please do type them in, and it'll be lovely to get through a few of your questions as we're going through the evening. But Simon, I'm going to ask you about the within the Museum of Literature, within Molly. One thing, I guess, to be honest, one thing that I'm very envious of is that really beautiful back garden that you guys have out the back. And I think knowing you, I can only imagine that it has some relationship back to the museum. Is there?
Yeah, yeah, the garden is a massive part of it. Actually, I remember, I think it was on my first day on the job, and I was quite alone actually in the building. It was interesting, and I snuck up onto the roof because there was nobody really to stop me, and I was looking out over the back, and I knew that the museum had a connection in to the Ivy Gardens, but I never just saw how explicit it was, and actually how beautiful and peaceful its own garden was. And I just thought, my goodness, in the middle of a capital city, there's this amazingly quiet kind of oasis. Now, it was pretty plain at the time. So when we brought a landscaper in, a chap named Kieran Beattie, who does a lot of work for UCD, actually a great guy, and I said to Kieran, like, is there a way that we can make this kind of touch nearly every aesthetic sense in the way that we design this garden? Can we make it smell really beautiful and change scent at different times of the year? Can we make it change color all the time? Can we make it sound interesting as well? It's so quiet. It's so insulated from the noise of the city. Can we plant in such a way that we attract specific types of birds and birdsong? So that was actually what guided the whole thing, and it's interesting at the moment because the city itself is so quiet due to the lack of traffic. And you've probably noticed, Sarah, on St. Stephen's Green, like that the volume of birdsong is really incredible. And we were filming in the garden last week for a documentary that's going out on RT1 on the museum on Bloomsday. And the birdsong was a real problem, like it worked. The planting scheme worked, but it was really out of control. We were like, what are we going to do, but it's, and then that garden opens out into the Ivy Gardens as well, which a lot of Dubliners call the secret garden, because, a huge amount of Dubliners have never been. So it's amazing in a capital city to have that. And we just really try and integrate, like a lot of our education programs use the gardens as well. We bring the kids out into the gardens. We actually focus all of our attention on schools that don't have access to green space, so we can use those gardens in that way. And that's all part of the learning program that we have.
Sounds wonderful. I think the complaint that there's too much birdsong is a wonderful one.
Yeah.
That's the complaint I'll keep any day.
Enjoy it while it lasts, yeah.
Absolutely. And I guess another question that I was kind of curious about when I was thinking about this conversation earlier this week was, the name that you've given the Museum of Literature, Molly, is, I guess, for Ulysses fans, quite intelligent for quite a number of reasons. And I guess I'd love to know about the process of coming out with that name. How did it evolve? Was it one of a couple of contenders? Can you give us any insight on what was the name that wasn't to be?
Yeah, we essentially, the project had a working title, which was called the Ulysses Centre, which in retrospect was actually a very academic kind of name for it. But it was just a working title. And we went to an agency, fantastic agency called Creative Inc. To see if they could help us come up with a name. And they're very good at this type of thing. And, I gave them like a really impossible brief. I said, we want a name that I suppose presents the gravitas of the partner institutions, explains the potential of the project as well, what's going on inside. We also want the name to have another version of itself that will subvert all of that seriousness and be really playful and open. And then because Joyce was at the center of it, and I knew that was really important, particularly for Martin and Carmel Naughton, that it had to have that Joycean reference within the name. That was really, really important. So I just said, there you go, good luck with that. And but I remember the day when when the head of the agency phoned me, and I was on Leeson Street, and she was really excited, and she said, I think we have it, Molly or Moll or Molly. And I was like, I think you have it as well, but just come up with 3 other options anyway, just in case. So, but yeah, it stuck straight away. It was just, and people really warmed to it immediately. And that's what I had wanted the name to do. I wanted the name to be something that opened up the doors of the museum in a way. Yeah.
I think it does that beautifully. And I do remember the day that we sat in the cafe in the basement of the little museum, and you were kind of almost in whispered breath saying, we've come up with a name, and it is.
So I'm so indiscreet, it's terrible. But the other thing that's nice about it is that you know, the character of Molly Bloom is, you know, like, I mean, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of Nora Barnacle, Joyce's wife, in there, and she was his muse. So to name the museum after a muse is very kind of fitting in what a museum is, which is, you know, a house of the muses. So yeah,
it's building on multiple levels.
it is.
I have Oscar, I have a question that's just come in for you from one of our participants that you might be able to answer. This person is asking, how does the acidity affect different wines, comparing, say, red to white wine?
Yeah. So the acidity, what it does is that brings heavier palate. So the more acidity you have in a wine, you're gonna have more mid palate and more persistency. The wine is gonna be more lingering, um, and the lack of acidity makes the wines flat, like if it was water. And the acidity is absolutely normal in the grape, and it's a mixture. It's a combination of three acids: tartaric, which you feel it in the tip of the tongue here. So usually when you find something really acidic and it like just like that, usually it's tartaric or citric. Both are really acid, and you feel them in here. And then the third acid would be malic, and the malic you don't feel it here. The malic you feel it in the end of the palate, like starting the tongue here. So that acid brings persistency on the palate and mid palate. It's just a matter of filling and combination of the three acids and how they develop during ripening of the harvest. How are you going to get the wines? Of course, there are some wines that are corrected, especially the entry-level wines, because they sell those acids. They're natural, so they're absolutely accepted. But in our case, of course, we don't, because we're right on the ocean. So usually the acidity is high, and that's why the palate and the juiciness of the wine, they're more voluptuous.
That's a beautiful word. And I guess it's over the last couple of weeks, we've tasted a number of different grape varieties, and we've been talking about this relationship between the different varieties and talking about this idea of wine genetics. And we've been talking about mother wine, father wine, and kind of where they all sit. And I just wonder, could you tell me a bit about what the relationship between Chardonnay and the other wine varieties would be?
Okay, so I would have to compare, whites, so not to have a very large talk, but basically Chardonnay, everything is on the grapes. So every difference comes from the grape. And in the case of the Chardonnay, the bunches are very small genetically. The bunches are like hollow. They are little berries. They're very loose. So the relation between the skin, the seed, and the juice in the berry is very low. So there's a lot of solids, compared to juice. Whereas in a Sauvignon Blanc, to give, the typical comparison, the berries are big, the bunches are big, and the skins are really thin. So the relation between juice and skin is higher. So that's why Chardonnay is more concentrated, because you have more skin, more tannins, more solids in general. And that's also why, Chardonnay is riper, besides the genetical factor. It's riper because you have to ripe that skin and you have to ripe that seed, and that takes longer than in the Sauvignon Blanc. So that's why usually a Chardonnay is more tropical, or it can be mineral and more like a Chablis, more elegant, or like a Chilean Sauvignon Chardonnay from really close to the coast. You have to find more minerality. It also depends on the soils, but that would be a general difference between Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. And that's why Chardonnay usually people do malolactic fermentation in Chardonnay because of the same thing, because as it's more concentrated and you find tropical fruit, you blend that with more buttery aromas, which are typically expected on a Chardonnay. Some are not, some are, that depends on the style of the wine. But that would be in general terms, differences that you can find in both varietals.
Okay, and when you talk about this idea of mixing, say, the more buttery textures to kind of marry that with the different tastes, like it's, to someone who, this world of winemaking is so distant and kind of, it's fascinating to learn about. But it's kind of, one thing that I've kind of been thinking about a lot recently is that the act of making a bottle of wine seems like quite a creative but also technical process. And I wonder, in my head, on the one side, I'm thinking about just kind of going, is your work and your role in producing a bottle of wine creative and technical, or one or just the other, or how would you perceive it?
We, the winemakers, at least in Chile, we study 5 years. We have like 60% of chemistry on all engineering stuff related to chemistry, of course. And then on the last 2 years, we specialize on tasting and sensory profiles and stuff like that. We're not sommeliers. Sommeliers usually know a lot about the world and the pairings, and profiles. We make the wines. And of course, we naturally know a lot also because of the experience, because we go a lot abroad, before we get stuck, to the family and the company. We go a lot abroad. So we usually all study in California or in France or in different countries. So we get both sides of the thing, the sensory and the romantic, but a lot of technical. And we need a lot of technical, to take care of the grapes and to find the right time of the harvest. And then the fermentations are very technical as well, because finally, the target is that a consumer like you just want a really good wine with a defined style, okay, but a really good wine. So no explanation, in the bottle will work. And it's a long process for a Chardonnay. Look, you're tasting a 2015, and I'm making the 2020 now, vintage. So you can see how long, the life of a wine has to be, and how much do we have to take care of that wine so you can taste it 5 or 6 years after that, and have a good wine in your glass. And that's a big goal, a big thing.
It's a big responsibility. It's
yeah.
Well, yeah. And there's nothing more enjoyable than being given a nice bottle of wine and sitting down and enjoying a good conversation with some friends. I know it's one thing that I'm using this experience of the 120 Dublin Stories is planning in my head the wines that are going to accompany each of the meals when I finally get to sit down with my family and friends again when this is all over. So I'm doing my homework at the same time. And I guess in that kind of idea of planning for the future and the fact that we will move forward, Simon, I know something that was really very evident in the kind of the communications that I was seeing coming out of Molly since you guys opened is that programming and special events and kind of, I saw that there was a radio station that you had launched, that this is a really large part of the work that you guys seem to be doing. You seem to be engaging a lot of living artists as well. Is it kind of core to the mission, and has this always been a priority?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that we always thought of the project as not being purely about the past, but but being about the present, and actually, always having an eye on the future at the same time. So we do an awful lot of work with living artists. We involved a lot of living writers in making the exhibitions. We have, a perfect example of it actually is at the moment, there are all of these online learning programs that we've been releasing for teenage writers. And we're using a lot of like super well-known Irish young adult fiction writers who actually sell, I mean, books in the hundreds of thousands abroad, you know. But a lot of us grown-ups wouldn't know about them, but they're amazing people and brilliant communicators as well, because like they're always talking to kids about writing. And they're the, like, you know, those kids that they're teaching, like some of those kids that are coming into us, they're the next generation. They're eventually going to be collected and be in the museum as well themselves. So I think, and that was a big challenge with this museum. And I think the subject matter was that, you know, literature is, in a way, it's a subject that can feel like a closed door, in that it's something that can feel very lofty. And to me, the biggest challenge was how do we get very young kids in front of this subject, and how do we make them realize from a very early age that that people like Joyce, Beckett, Heaney, Maeve Binchy, Kate O'Brien, Mary Lavin, all these people, that this is their heritage. And for people who are kind of, whose families only moved to Ireland, you know, in a generation ago, that their kids and them, this is now their literary heritage as well. So, you know, people like me who have always been, you know, who have studied literature or who are interested in it, I mean, we're always going to end up visiting this museum at some point. To me, the challenge is, what about the people who may never come? Or who may never be interested in it? How do we get them in front of it, and how do we make them realize that this is this really subversive, playful, joyous art form that's on their doorstep, you know, that teaches them about themselves?
I guess it's during the last couple of months, the number of us kind of turning to books and turning to literature to get us through this lockdown period. I know myself, I've 2 book clubs going on with different friends reading different books around different subjects. But when you're talking about this whole idea of opening up the museum and trying to bring people in and trying to kind of engage people who wouldn't otherwise necessarily go into museums, I remember noticing one thing on the last visit that I took into yourselves that I thought was really intelligent, that you have an exhibition going on, and I'm going to get the details of this wrong, so please correct me, but you have an exhibit within the museum that travels internationally with different, is it through the different consulates, is that right?
Yeah, that's the plan. So it's a lovely idea for an exhibition series called Literary Cities, where we pick a city, you know, probably once every year, twice a year, that has some kind of connection to Irish writing, and we explore that connection, and then also amplify the literary aspects of that city as well. So we started, I suppose, quite obviously with Paris, because there's so much Joyce, and we thought, you know, like, I mean, he spent so much time there. Beckett spent so much time there. Wilde as well. So we felt, you know, the Centre Culturel Irlandais is there, and so there's this lovely little mini exhibition there. The current proprietor of Shakespeare and Company, who published Ulysses back in 1922. The current proprietor there actually recommended a lot of contemporary French novels for our visitors to read, which they can buy in the shop. So, and we'll move through different cities, and it's really it's an opportunity, you know, not just to talk about Irish writing in other countries, but to kind of walk back in the footsteps of Irish writers who went abroad, and because so many of them did, and then to expand the horizons of our own readers. You know, like, Irish writing is very famous around the world, but so are lots of other international writings, and getting those in front of our audience was important as well.
It's no, it's wonderful, and it's really exciting to see how much you guys have already achieved in such a short amount of time, and kind of it only rings true as to what the future inevitably is going to hold. And it's I see a comment here asking what the future of the 2 museums working together is, and I'm not going to put you on the spot for that one, but it's
we'll dig a tunnel underneath the green to go from one to the other.
Yeah, I remember one idea that we had previously as well was tin cans between the 2 offices, so we could have a string across the green. But another question that's being asked here that, Oscar, you might be able to answer. There's a person who's wondering, can Chilean Chardonnays age like a white Burgundy?
Yeah. Wait, before regarding writers, I don't know a lot about Irish writers, but I really want to go to the museum already because I'm watching the comments and it's something I really need to do. I've been in Ireland like 4 or 5 times, and the first time I was there, I met Terry Pennington, which is our manager
Mm.
there. He's Irish, and he gave me this book.
Ah, the that's wonderful. We have an important anniversary coming up on that very subject, not too far from now.
Yeah,
So,
and I gave it
Right book.
I read it on the 2010, and now that I was gonna have this, I last week I started reading it again.
okay.
Very nice book.
Well, Terry, if you want to pop in a question, I'm sure you're probably on the line. We'll do it. We'll do a quiz and see how your reading was going.
So thank you, Terry. Really nice of you. So going to the question, yeah, of course. We have two popular valleys in Chile for Chardonnay. That would be Casablanca Valley with a lot of clay soils. Usually are very have a lot of fruit, but not very intense in the palate. Whereas in Limari, the one you're tasting now, is, as I said before, also very close to the coast, on the coast, but with more sandy, more calcium, and more oceanic, soils, limestone, and so they have a bigger palate. And then those wines can balance really well with oak aging, with barrels, with big barrels, so you can age them for a while. And but even though both styles, with or without, they can age very well because of the acidity I was saying before. The acidity plays a really big role in terms of aging. The more natural acidity you have in a wine, the more you can age it, and the more it needs to be aged, because it's not just a matter of saying, okay, this wine is 10 years old or 20, it's better than the other one. It's not, it doesn't work that way. There is a natural balance, between the tannins, the phenols, the acidity, the sweetness, and etc. The aromas that have to sit in place, and that really depends on each condition. So there are wines that are ready to drink in 2 years or 3 years. Other wines, like, let's say, a Cab Franc from a high latitude, uh, um, have to be aged because the tannins are harsh and the acidity is higher. So thus, you need to age it, to bring the acidity down and to let the phenols combine with the other compounds in the wine. So, but in this case, yeah, you can age it. Well, you have to tell me, you're having a 2015. Let me know how it is.
Oh, I think it's beautiful. As Simon said earlier, it is that smell. Yeah, it is something. It's fun. This particular wine, to me, is, I think, Simon, I kind of get the impression that's what you were alluding as well. This smells like the Little Museum of Dublin. In my mind, I smell this Chardonnay, I'm thinking of an event that we're hosting in the evening. There's something special going on. There's people in the room having fun, laughing, smiling. And so it reminds me of very nice moments. And I think I'm actually enjoying this particularly because of that very reason, that, and it is one of those things that you're noticing. I guess you're just appreciating it because we're kind of all at home at the moment and not really kind of in the museum in the way we normally are. But it's kind of, I'm going to go back and ask you a question about when we were talking about vines earlier, and I was asking about the early harvest this year, and you were saying that the vines are intelligent and they know what to do in terms of responding to the conditions that they're within. That kind of got me thinking about them as a living thing. Like, what is the life cycle of a vine actually like? Is that a too big of a question?
Yeah. Okay. So usually a vine, well, you can find 100-year-old vines, but usually a normal cycle would be like 30 years or more, but not less than that. So you plant the vine and you start producing like on a regime, status, like the fourth year. So you first you let it grow, you let it go to the wire where we hang the vine. That could be on the first or the second year. Then we depending on how the roots are and how the condition of the vine and the soil and the water, etc. We make decisions, simultaneously. And then the next year, it's already up in the wire, but we need to form, the structure of the vine. And so we usually preserve, the quality of the vine. We don't want any fruit. And then so we wait another more year, after we see that the vine is completely healthy and ready to produce. Then we let the vine produce grapes. And then it starts evolving, throughout the years to more concentrate. Well, and that depends on the climate, on the soil. It's a combination, and so you start getting, the final profile of the vines. And in terms of a single year, after the vine is already producing, so you prune during winter. Then because the vine, we have to take off all the material, that already produced the year before. So we prune the vines, and then when spring starts, the spurs, start growing, and then we do a lot of work with the leaves to get the right amount of sun exposure to the wine, to microclimate, temperature, the foliar tension, the water amount. And so we are all the season, working with the vine to try to take the right balance, and so it ripes naturally. Otherwise, after years, after your vine and your place and you learn, that usually comes natural. And so the more years the vine has, the less things you do in the vine. Like manual work on the vine, because it adapts, naturally to the condition.
Okay, so it learns the environment that it's within.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. That's something I've kind of always been curious about. And Simon, I'm going to come back to you for a moment, and I'm going to ask a slightly nostalgic question, if you don't mind. So obviously you were our founding curator in the museum, and we worked together for, I guess, probably the bones of 7 years. Is that right? Yeah. And I guess when you look back at your time with the museum, I wonder if you'd have, I guess, a favorite moment and maybe a proudest moment in terms of when you reflect on that time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There was one, we did an exhibition. It was too breakneck at the beginning, the speed of it, to kind of have time to reflect on it at all. Actually, like you only really able to properly reflect on the whole period of time in the Little Museum after the fact. In a way, such an amazing project to have been involved in. But there was one moment when we did an exhibition on Christy Brown, who was a very well-known Dublin writer who had cerebral palsy, and an Oscar-winning movie was made about him called My Left Foot, which was based on one of his biographies and one of his autobiographies. And there was this moment where there was a number of Christy's family who were still alive, and his story was iconic and nearly mythical. But there were people who were in that story that we had all seen through the movie. Most people had not read the book, and there were these characters in the movie, and one of them in particular was a lady who was a social worker who had looked after him and kind of when he was younger, and had noticed that he had this potential. And had gotten him kind of, therapy and support to kind of, she was a real instrumental figure in his life. And it turned out that she was still alive, and she was in a nursing home, and her daughter was in touch with us. And it was, she got out of the nursing, she left the nursing home for the launch of the exhibition. She arrived in kind of unbelievably glamorous. She had her hair done that day. She was in her 90s. and her daughter had planned to make a speech on her behalf, and she wouldn't let her. She made this incredible speech all about the first time she saw Christy, and his sister was still alive and is still alive, and she hadn't seen her in like 15 or 20 years. And it was this gorgeous moment. And I remember thinking, you know, my goodness, we're dealing, because in the Little Museum, we permitted ourselves to work with very recent history. The stories were like these kind of molten rocks in our hands. They were like hot, living kind of things. And that I never really realized that until that moment, you know. And I just thought, like, this is just an unbelievable occasion to be standing at, and to actually have been involved in orchestrating that, you know. So I really felt very like really proud of the work. That was the, you know, I mean, I'm in retrospect, I'm so proud of all of the work, but that was the first moment where I realized it at the time that this was really important, that it was very powerful. And that as well, you know, there were subjects that could just disappear that were hugely important to us, not just as Dubliners, but as human beings. And that it falls to sometimes small museums to pick that up and to represent it as valuable to its audiences.
Yeah, God, it's funny. I haven't thought of that moment, and actually a couple of years that was really special. I remember she had that blue cardigan on her. So yeah. Anyway, that's
and a fantastic hairdo. Yeah.
Very much so. And I guess a question that I asked Trevor a couple of weeks ago that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on. I asked Trevor if he could think of the moment that he realised that this was no longer just a daft idea, that this had actually become a museum that had the potential to stick and become kind of an important part of the city. You know, did you have one of those moments?
I remember and I'm sure Trevor would have pick a different point in time, but I remember we were, the project had started as essentially a 2-room museum in a vacant building in a recession, owned by the city council. And, you know, we knew that, I mean, more out of practicality than anything else, that, you know, we had to make this thing work very, very quickly, or else we'd both be kind of out on our ear, like, you know, we wouldn't be able to survive, and we'd very young kids, and, you know, it was kind of really like, you know, but there was nothing to lose in a way. But I remember us realizing at one point that the ground floor was being used periodically by the Solomon Gallery for exhibitions. And we realized, you know, the city council could rent out the ground floor, and the project, in a way, its potential would just immediately be restricted. So we had no idea what we would do with the ground floor or the rest of the building at the time, but we just felt we have to ask for it. So, you know, in true Trevor White fashion, we went in and we made some marvelously confident pitch for the rest of the building, and they let us have it, and then we filled it with the rest of the ideas, and it was, you know, and it grew that way. But I think that was a moment when, because we had a conversation walking up Stephen's Green about it, and we said, you know, do we want it to expand? Do we want it to grow from being this small little boutique idea? And we realized around then that other people had tried to create a museum of Dublin of some kind or other over the years, and all of those projects had, for good or ill, had failed at some point. And this one, for whatever reasons, had managed to get a little bit down the road, and we kind of felt an obligation then to the idea as well, beyond ourselves, that no, we have to let it grow. We have to kind of do everything we can to allow this thing to gather momentum, you know. So Trevor might dispute that, but
but he's not here to say anything. But anyway, Oscar, it'll be I think it'd be lovely in next time you're in Dublin to actually bring you in to talk about the museum, or not to talk about the museum, to show you around the museum and to kind of let you get a clearer sense of what we have going on in the little museum. But I guess
absolutely,
I'd like to ask your advice, Oscar, from the perspective of a winemaker. Say, like my partner has a 0 birthday, so a significant birthday coming up in a couple of months' time. And if I decide I wanted to buy a gift of a bottle of wine for someone to mark an occasion. In taking your advice, what would you think that I should be looking for? Like, is it the backstory? Is it where it's come from? Is it the value of the wine? What are the factors I should take into consideration from your perspective?
Look, so the best wine for you probably is the wine you like the most. that that seems like a very obvious answer, but what I am trying to say with that is that the X factor, that makes a wine the best wine is, I mean, there's so many of people in this world. Each one, likes what they like, and that like is the best. And so then that's why there are so many wines in the world, so many varietals, so many niche, for each wine, for each style in the world, because there is a demand for that, and people wants to drink, and enjoy a glass of wine. So my advice is not specific. It's just try the wines, taste the wine, love the wines, taste them at a nice temperature. Don't drink them hot,
Yeah.
because then it's not wine anymore, and you cannot enjoy. And the beautiful thing about the wine, besides drinking it, is that the wine is complex. It's not a Coke, because there are so many things, so many people involved, not just behind the winemaking, but also the viticulture, the project, the company, the history, the oak, the forest, where you get the wood from. So many things, the history, the everything. So the more you learn about a wine, or the more you get interested about the wine, the more you learn. And by learning, you add value to what you're tasting. And by adding that value, it becomes more important for you. And then you're going to be willing, not just pay more, but ask for more, ask for more history, ask for more storytelling, behind the wine. And so I just invite everybody, to taste the wine, and try to learn always a little bit more, every time you open a bottle. And then you're going to start liking more and more, the wine tasting.
It sounds like confidence and experimentation are what you're calling for, which are two positive things as far as I'm concerned when it comes to wine enjoyment. And I guess just to pick up on that, you said the word like quite a few times. So when you're in your own home on a Saturday evening, what do you like to drink?
I like Chardonnay.
Okay. Well then.
No, well, yeah, I really like my daily wine is a Chardonnay, even though it's not the most popular wine in the world. Probably would be the Sauvignon Blanc and others, rather than the Chardonnay. But as I said, there is a niche, for everyone here, and my niche is the Chardonnay. I also drink a lot of Riesling. I love Riesling, but I would say I'm a white guy, definitely. I drink white wines all the time, and I do drink red wines when I have a meat, when I'm eating something that goes with the red wine. But like a day-to-day drink to enjoy, I'm a white guy, definitely.
I was fortunate enough to taste the Casa Real previously, the red wine that you produce, and that's particularly special. I really enjoyed that as far as the red wine, despite the fact that I would usually be a white wine drinker myself as well.
Yeah, that Casa Real was wine legend, vintage 1989 by Decanter magazine, and that's our iconic wine. There's a whole lot of history behind that wine. The oldest vines, which are about 100 years old, and the yield is nothing, So they're really concentrated. They're not, there is a thing about our Chilean viticulture. On the mid 19th century, there was a plague called phylloxera that killed all the plants in almost all the world. In Chile, we still don't get that, knock glass wood. So like I would say like 80% of our muscle selection, our natural selection vines, and our natural evolution still sitting here on our on our soil, and basically, the plants that are not grafted, they don't have clones. They're just that's how we call it, muscle selections, because they evolved in situ. They evolved in the place, so they got the different characteristics that make the wine a specific wine from that terroir, and that is a very important characteristic from our wines in Chile, and in our case, the Casa Real is 100% muscle selection, very old vines, which have evolved, and its complexity is given by the evolution of the muscle selections in the terroir in Maipo, Andes, and also because of the climate, and because it's sitting on the best soil in Chile for sure for making Cabernet Sauvignon, which is Maipo, where the capital is Santiago, but just south of that, we have 8 million people living in Santiago right now in quarantine, and south of that, we have 1,600 hectares right on the foothills of the Andes, like 1,000 meters above the sea level. It's an amazing place.
And the idea of 8 million people in quarantine sounds quite intense, but I think we're hopefully on the journey out of quarantine as our kind of phases are evolving here in Ireland. And I see a very sweet note from Trevor, not disputing anything that you said in the comments here, Simon. And I think just to pull out one sentence from it, you're a hugely talented and creative person as well as a wonderful human being. I think that's as a sentence.
That is the wine talking, Trevor.
Nice.
I didn't quote that bit, but I think
I'll take it where I can get it. Thank you.
So I think kind of obviously ourselves and yourselves are kind of in the depths of planning our reopening strategies and our kind of post-COVID museum experiences. And so I guess to kind of coming to a close on this evening, Simon, what are you excited about? What are you optimistic about for the future in Molly?
It's interesting that these like periods of times like this, it's very easy to get bogged down in so much of the negative, but there's also a sense of it being an opportunity to kind of to clean your house in a way, and to and to really, when you have such a massive behavioral shift which is going on at the moment in so many ways, it's an opportunity to leave things behind that aren't useful, and to develop things that are really useful for the future. And one of the things that we've had to do, and it's a function of, I suppose, I'm anticipating that there won't be very much international tourism for a while, is saying, well, how do we really focus this museum on being even more useful for our local audience? Because so much is predicated on the idea of international tourism, but I've been really feeling like, no, I mean, if you really sat down and wanted to make this museum really useful for locals, what would you do? And I kind of thought about it like, it's like the post office or the bank. If you ask a local when should they be open, it's like lunchtimes and in the evenings and the weekend. So just the fact that we're moving to an opening time system that that I thought would take us years to get to. We're going to open late every evening. From now on, we're probably going to close one day a week, probably Mondays, but we're going to open later in the morning, stay open in the evening, allow kids to come in and families, in the evening, because there won't be bars and restaurants maybe as much for people to go to, or it might be trickier. And programming in the gardens, things like that. I think I'm kind of excited about the ways that we're going to improve because of COVID. Like that. I mean, we're very lucky, I suppose, in that the buildings that I'm in there's a lot of large open spaces. I mean, we were socially distancing anyway. in a way. So so that's not so tricky for us. But making the staff safe, I suppose, which is where they're in much more smaller spaces. That's the tricky bit. But I think, you know, figuring out new ways of having events in the space, doing more online. I think, you know, I think this type of conversation this evening, we've all suddenly become very comfortable with this type of interaction. It pulls away a lot of the mystique that sometimes bigger physical events do. It's much more informal. It's, you know, it can be a lot more fun. I think most of our programming in the museum is always going to have components like this as well now, that will reach much more people. So yeah, I think it's a really, there are behavioral shifts that are really positive, you know, as well.
And I think the act of sitting on the Zoom call, as we heard this evening, with the bones of 100 people just chatting, it is a very different format. And it's like, as you said, we've had people over the last few weeks who have been joining us, having previously attended our lecture series, but like that are now living in parts of the country where they wouldn't get into the physical building. And that's a wonderful thing that this has opened up. So I guess to you both, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and with your stories this evening. I see a lady here has a gentleman, apologies, has commented that they've loved your contributions, Oscar, and found it so level and accessible. And I know, as someone who is learning about wine as the process is going on, I would really echo that sentiment and say sincerely thank you for all of your thoughts and advice this evening. And then Simon, it's been lovely to hear about what's going on in the Museum of Literature, but also to reminisce on some of the days in the little museum gone by. And I think to everyone who's joined us, thank you again so much for being here. In terms of next week's session, we're going to send out a note following this, but next week we're going to be joined by Lara Joy, who's the Heritage Director down in the Dublin Port, talking about the history of the Dublin Port and that part of the city. A historian by profession, he's a fascinating person, and that will be a really interesting experience. And then we'll also be joined by restaurant manager and sommelier Ed Jolliffe, who is formerly of Chapter 1. And Ed is going to take some time to talk with us about, he's going to host a tasting of Santa Rita Rosé, but then also talk to us about food pairings. I think as the weather is starting to get slightly nicer, it's definitely time to start planning some barbecues and start matching our food accordingly. But I guess, again, on behalf of everyone here, Simon, Oscar, thank you both so much, and stay well.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Oscar.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Simon. Cheers.
Nice.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night.